the president saying that the Department of Public Enterprises could no longer be there in a couple of years, more specifically as a result of the next administration. So let's head over to Pali Lehohla, who's the former Statistician General, to get his view on this as well. Mr. Lehohla, good to have you with us on the show. It's always a pleasure for you to take time in joining us. So let me just talk about what the president had said. So we might not have a DPE come the next administration. What was your first reaction when you heard the president say that?
Well, my reaction to things of this that are so profound always have to find the rationale for whether to have or not to have. And I think that is grounded into what kind of state we would like to be. If we wish to be a developmental state, it requires a different configuration. And if we desire a different state that we have been, then another configuration that prescribes another configuration. So it really depends on what state we define ourselves to be or to be seeking to be. What is official in terms of South Africa is that we want to be a developmental state. That being so, then the architecture and design of a developmental state requires that there are SOEs. And the configuration of these SOEs can take the form of a Department of Public Enterprises, which then becomes the science policy of the country. But how you staff that public enterprises, ideally you would have brought people who have worked in ESCOM, have worked in Transnet, have worked in this, and by their nature are scientists and industrialists themselves. So you get a continuation between those industries and the Department of Public Enterprises. But the defect with that is that when the department, when the actual department, say mineral energy, divorced from ESCOM, you kill the umbilical cord. That is a natural link between the department and the SOE. Because the nature of the SOEs in the developmental state, they mitigate and transact with the private sector in lieu of government responsibilities. So they are government, and they mitigate and confront or provide a bridge between government and the private sector. And that helps the developmental state to function. Otherwise, we have total privatization, which is almost what is being mooted at the moment, with ESCOM being divided into three sections, which are horizontally integrated instead of a vertically integrated monopoly. So all these require, what are you trying to solve? If you are looking at a definition of a developmental state, you actually need the infrastructure of SOEs. But that infrastructure of SOEs must be such that they are attached to the host department because they have functionality in there. But then you face probably policy divergence in terms of each, whether Transnet, ESCOM, and so on have an integrated agenda. Then you lose that integration. But if you seek that integration, you then need high-level people that have actually worked in those institutions, are scientists in their own right, have worked in those. And then they form the policy department, not the operational department. I think that then the DPME, or rather the Department of Public Enterprises, becomes the policy department and not the operational department.
And I think that's what many people are getting confused about as to why the president came out and said this. And I think you've clarified very nicely. My team just telling me, Mr. Lehohla, if you don't mind, what we do is we actually have the soundbite from the president when he was talking about this yesterday as well. Mr. Lehohla, you will be able to hear this as well, so you don't go anywhere. But I think just for some context, let's just play the soundbite from what the president actually said. Because this can become quite granular, quite complicated, and I want to make sure that we all are on the same page. Here's what the president had to say about this conversation.
The Ministry of Public Enterprises will cease to exist. It will cease to exist because the entities that are now overseeing by the Ministry of Public Enterprises will revert back to their departments. And as I've often been saying, the coordinating structure, which is your state-owned enterprise holding company, which is going to enhance proper coordination, give us all line of sight of what's happening in our state-owned enterprises, the financial discipline that should be there, benefiting, as I said earlier, on the economies of scale when it comes to procurement, the board, the governance systems, and all that will now be housed in a state-owned enterprise holding company as that ministry then exists. Now, that ministry, as I said, is now in the process of putting together the legislation, putting together the wherewithal through which this holding company is going to function.
All right, so that's what the president had to say. That's the actual part of the Q&A session that Dr. Lehohla and I are busy talking about it at the moment. And Dr. Lehohla, you actually lined me up very nicely to take us to that soundbite, because you were talking about these coordinating structures that are needed for a developmental state, if that's the avenue we pursue. There is one thing I want to get your thoughts on. Just, I might start saying goodbye to you in a moment. The moment you start hearing the president talk about words and talk about terms like holding companies for SOEs, my mind immediately goes privatization. You have an SOE housed under a holding company. Is that where this is going, do you think? Or have I got this wrong? Many people on Twitter saying it sounds like it's going privatization. Do you think that that's where this is going?
Well, I would guess that what one needs to have is, does a holding company design policies, or do policies get designed by ministries? And in my mind, perhaps there is something like the Ministry of Department of Trade and Industry, which then designs the policies that integrate the different aspects that the SOEs play in its function of industrialization, because I think the SOEs play a larger role in terms of industrialization. So I wouldn't go for a holding company. I would go for the Ministry of Trade and Industry, as it happened in Japan, where the MIT, the Ministry of Industry, had all these companies, SOEs, under itself. Or rather, the design of policies were under the MIT in the case of Japan. I'm not sure whether the SOEs themselves were attached to the Ministry of Industries, but I think the SOEs have to be attached to the host department, because that increases its possibilities of functionality. The coordination, if it is industrialization as a purpose, then the ministry that should look at policies around that must be the Ministry of Industry and Industries, because policy is very crucial. And if you put this on a holding company, you miss the point of the efficiencies that are gathered around policy design and policy implementation. That would be in the Ministry of Industries.
And this is what you're talking about, is these line function departments that the president was perhaps also talking about, to get that realigned and all moving in the same direction as well. So if we were to do it the way you're suggesting, as far as your example in Japan is concerned, how easily, Dr. Lehohla, a brief answer if it's possible, I need to start saying goodbye to you, to use that example, what would need to change in our current SOE structures to move in the direction that you are suggesting, if not dissolving DPE to go your route? What's the timeline? How easy would that be to do?
Well, the DPE basically is superfluous, because it's neither a trade and industry ministry or a line function ministry in relation to SOEs. So the best integration that I foresee is the SOEs get attached, ESCOM gets attached to minerals and energy, transport, Transnet to transport and so on. But they coordinate the policy making and design. It's all about industrialization. How do you revitalize your industrialization strategy? Therefore, the department that holds the policy design in respect of this should be Ministry of Trade and Industry. And there's no need for a holding company. That's what I'm arguing. That integrate this within the policy space so that line of sight is within those ministries that drive a purpose called industrialization. And if the industrialization is the target, then ESCOM is an input in that, trade and industry, or rather, ESCOM is an input in that, Transnet is an input in that, and everything is an input in that design of industrialization. Don't bring a superfluous structure that is outside the policy. Then you start putting, piles and piles of. By the way, let me say that coordination, if it's an input, is the wrong thing. It presupposes a superfluous structure. Coordination as an outcome, when you see that and you say, that looks like a well-coordinated structure, then as an outcome, it's what, then that design as an outcome is the right design. But as an input into the structure, it's superfluous and leads to a lot of confusion.
Yeah, it can lead to a lot of confusion as well, and I think this is why we're having this discussion now, because I imagine in the build-up to the change of administration in years to come, where the President says, Dr. Lehohla, as I say thank you and goodbye to you, that DPE will cease to exist. We're going to start hearing things like policy designs, industrializations. We're going to have coordinating inputs and outputs, and this is why I wanted to set the scene with you now, because I suspect we're going to be debating this for years to come. But I think you've set the basis very nicely for what's a very complicated conversation. But even I was able to follow that. So, Dr. Pali Lehohla, as always, I thank you for your time. Wearing a yellow shirt again. Almost didn't recognize him when he's not wearing yellow shirts these days. But he's put one on for us this morning. Dr. Lehohla, thank you very much indeed for your time.